Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Child Life in Action. I'm Meagan Roloff, Director of Member Engagement and Partnerships with ACLP. In this series, we're highlighting some of the great work being done by child life specialists and some of the unique and innovative approaches that they are using while we try to adapt to the changing needs in the world and meet the needs of the children and families that we work with. Today, I'm really excited to be joined by two fantastic guests. We have Dottie Barnhart and Kimberly Jones. Dottie, can you introduce yourself and just tell us a little about who you are, where you work, and what your role is?
Yeah, sure. My name's Dottie Barnhart. Like Megan said, I work in Houston at Children's Memorial Hermann Hospital. I'm a child life specialist there. I've been there almost 4 years, and I started in the emergency department and now worked in the general pediatric department, and I'm currently just switched to being a floater. So I work on almost all the units 2 to 3 days a week.
Great. And Kimberly?
Yes, good afternoon. I'm Kimberly Jones, and I work with the Purvis Institute of Child Development out of Texas Christian University. And currently, I'm working in Houston on a project in collaboration with the Governor's Office Sex Trafficking Team to provide trauma-informed care, training, and support for local organizations who are serving survivors of commercial exploitation, or organizations who are serving kids who may be at risk for commercial sexual exploitation. And that's how Dottie and I met up a year ago-ish, something.
Yeah,
I don't know.
like that.
That sounds good. Yeah, and so that's my job. We have organizations currently in Houston, Beaumont, El Paso, San Antonio.
All right. So the reason I've been so excited to talk to you guys, a few months ago, I was able to go to Houston, visit Dottie's hospital, and talk with her a bit about trust-based relational intervention and some of the training that she's done and the work that she's doing around that. So just to start, to either of you, both of you, can you just, for those that aren't familiar, share a bit about what trust-based relational intervention is?
Sure, I can start, and then Dottie, if you want to tag. So trust-based relational intervention is a model that was created by the late Dr. Karyn Purvis and Dr. David Cross, both out of Texas Christian University. And it is a attachment-rich, science-based, rooted in the attachment theory intervention, initially created for kiddos who were in overseas adoption. And lo and behold, after much research, it was proven to be effective for kiddos who, what we like to term, are kiddos from hard places. And so these are kiddos who have had kind of complex developmental trauma, typically in those early years of significant development. And so TBRI is a framework and really a toolkit for caregivers of those kiddos. How do you care for the kiddos, understanding their trauma history and how trauma has affected their brains, their physical bodies, the belief systems about themselves, and their behaviors. So understanding all of that gives us a way to respond to them differently versus a lot of times we react to behaviors, and then give them tools to be able to communicate their needs differently in a way that many people can hear versus a lot of times it's through what we like to call trauma discharge. So behaviors, right? Fight, flight, or freeze. So that's what TBRI is. It really is a toolkit for caregivers who can then begin to understand how and why kiddos are responding. And then it's a way for caregivers to help kids learn how to communicate their needs in effective ways.
Now, when you say caregivers and you said that it started as a framework to help with international adoptions, obviously, the work that Dottie's doing as a child life specialist is quite a bit different than that. So when you say caregivers, what does that mean?
Yeah, that caregivers is anyone who is modeling for kiddos. And I think the word caregiver is really intentional because anyone who's been around TBRI understands that relationship, we say relationship is the intervention, right? Caregiving is what makes the difference. So whether you're a teacher, you're a caregiver, whether you're a child life specialist, in that moment, when you're with that kiddo, you are a caregiver because you're providing care. It's not the same way as kind of our systems describe caregiving. At any moment that you are engaging with the kid, because it is so relational, we want people to understand that for those moments, whether it's an hour in a therapy session or all the nurses who are there with a kiddo while they're there in the stay in the hospital, they're providing care.
And we've seen a lot so we've shared some TBRI training in our hospital with security guards, sitters, techs, nurses, physicians, PTOT, and more. And all those people like are caregivers in some way, maybe not like a foster parent or even just like a traditional parent. And all of them have been like, oh, I can use this in what I do. And they might take different elements of TBRI, but it's been cool to see them take different parts of it and run with it and use it in their scope and their own practice.
I love that you're including, members of the hospital team that I think we don't always think about as having an impact on the patient's experience. Security, techs. Mm-hmm. That's something that from the ACLP's perspective, with some of the emotional safety work that we've been starting on, that's been important to us. Thinking about, there are a lot of people that enter that room that don't often get that kind of training. It's not just your nurses and physicians and child life specialists. There's, your environmental staff, your dietary staff, food service, all these other people that they might see things, they might hear things, families talk to them, that we need to be including as we think about this.
Yeah.
So Dottie, from a child life perspective, how has having this TBRI training kind of impacted your practice?
It's impacted a lot. I'm also a mom of a toddler and I use TBRI in my house. My husband has used TBRI on me and on our child. So it's impacted just a whole lot of things. Kind of like Kim said, it's relationship based. So, and I think a lot of child life is relationship based, right? Like we build rapport, we connect with the child, and then we do maybe the intervention we've planned if that makes sense for what the patient needs in the moment. So it's hard to pick out like one way that it's impacted it. I think one way is in those crisis moments, because we have patients with, I think any kid coming through a hospital door is a kid from a hard place because they automatically have their world derailed. But especially those kids with history of psych diagnoses or trauma history or foster history, it seems like those kids especially have like those big crisis moments or where they get escalated. And what's been really cool is those escalation moments happen and I've been able to walk into rooms and I have that toolkit. I know like, oh, I bet one of these 5 things will help de-escalate this child. And sometimes it ends beautifully and like we're connected and calm and like we don't have to use restraint on a child. It doesn't always end like that, but it's been really powerful just to be able to walk into a room and know like, okay, these are 5 things I can do. And I know that they might be the right thing for this child. I'm not just like guessing or winging it. Like I've got this bag full of options that I can pull out and try with these kids. So that's been probably one of the biggest changes because I think we learn a little bit about that in school and with our child life theory, but not always like all the tools to use. And so it's been cool to like add to my toolkit with specific TBRI methods and just like ways to talk to kids. And also, like Kim said, just understanding where their brains are at. Because I had some understanding of that, but really that whole that idea of like the trauma brain or just how your brain functions during and after trauma has really helped me walk in to patient rooms and with families and just be mindful of what could be going on internally with these kids.
So can you share a little bit more about that trauma brain? Just, obviously we're not going to walk away from this conversation with every child life specialist expert. I don't expect that, but just kind of big picture, what should child life specialists know?
Kim, I'm going to punt that to you with your eloquent words.
I was ready for you, Dottie. I was ready for you. Okay, just a quick lesson. This is, I'll share with you a quick tip from Dr. Dan Siegel, who does a lot of work in trauma. And one of the things that he teaches is the hand-brain model. And so, right, we will have in a training, right, we would have all of our participants put their hand up, and they would put their thumb in the middle of their palm and explain that this is the kiddo's downstairs brain, right, the downstairs portion of their brain, the reptilian brain that's pretty much developed way early on, right? When the kiddo is born, this is where those trauma responses will come from: fight, flight, and freeze. Our kiddos from hard places, this part of the brain gets a lot of activity. So every trauma incident, this part of the brain gets activated, right? And so a kid is going to respond by fight, flight, or freeze. And then our prefrontal cortex, our higher functioning part of the brain, doesn't fully develop until we're in our 20s. This is where we're doing our cognitive thinking, our rational thinking, our consequences, our relational part of the brain. But when we have history and experience of trauma, we say a kiddo flips their lid, as in they no longer have even access to this part of the brain. Like, it's not that they don't want to behave, they can't behave, right? This part of the brain is so overdeveloped, they automatically, by default, kind of lean there and go there. And so that's what we just get people to understand. And when a kid's lid is flipped, the only thing that helps is a calm adult, right? Helping model to get that part of the brain back online. And we call that co-regulation. They need our help to calm, to learn how to calm. Us adding fuel to the fire, what's wrong with you? Blah, 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 blah. Right? That keeps a kid down here. And we call it pouring gasoline on the fire, versus us as caregivers walking in the room, understanding, okay, kid is in their downstairs brain. I need to be calm, right? I need to use kind of connecting strategies, make eye contact. If I have a relationship, my voice needs to be softer. If I have a relationship, I may be able to touch, right? To let them know I'm with them. And together, we can co-regulate and get that kiddo's higher functioning brain back online. But it's only then, right? And so we just help people just understand that. So that's some of, I think what Dottie's saying, that she just has a different framework. She was able to go, and I remember making those major mistakes. Kids were in their downstairs brain and I wanted to lecture them. And they heard nothing. Yeah. And if, and I could, right, set them ablaze even further, versus understand there are specific science-based strategies and interventions that you can use. Your job at that moment to help that kid regulate, and they need your calm to help their storm.
It's interesting that model and way of talking about it is making me think of kind of the classic child life, I think, teaching scenario we use of, you're in a procedure and there's, 5 adults in the room and everybody's talking at the kid, and, no one can understand why the kid's not calming down. And, of course they aren't. They're already overstimulated, and now everybody's talking at them, being calm down, calm down, calm down. And, it's another way of thinking about what I think as child life specialists we inherently know and advocate for, with one voice, and some of the other, comfort positioning, some of the other tools that we have in our child life tool belt. But I like that the imagery with, flipping your lid and pouring gasoline on the fire, that really makes it clear of, what's happening and where that kid's mental and emotional state is in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And Dottie has shared with us great stories of when she was really able to just beautifully demonstrate the intervention working with some of her kiddos that she's engaged with while she's in the hospital.
Dottie, would you mind
Like
sharing
to hear a story? Look at that transition.
Like that.
Yeah, I'll share a story. I've told this one a lot, so people that work with me have probably heard it before. But we had a patient, a teen boy, and I'll try to be very discreet just to honor him. A teen boy came in and multiple nurses said, "Hey, Dottie, you have to meet this kid." And they would tell me like parts of his story. He'd been in foster care for years and definitely had trauma history. And it had been aggressive with adults a few times. And so I had like, a lot of staff was like triggered or anxious about this kid. So I went and met the kid and just built rapport just to get like a baseline with him. In case something were to happen, I wanted to be able to already know him. And something did. The next day I got a call and I talked to the kid just about like basketball and video games. And, in that moment, he was just a normal kid. And like, I was able to connect with him. And the next day got a call that he was on the 5th floor and his room was on the 10th floor. And so I run down to the 5th floor. I took the elevator. I don't know. I got there somehow. And I walked into our 5th floor lobby and there are about 15 people around him trying to get him in a wheelchair so they can wheel him back to his room. So it is loud. It's confusing. And so I told people to be quiet. And people left. Like people had good intentions to try to help get this kid and staff to a safe place. And he was crisscrossed on the ground. And so I crisscrossed in front of him. This is before I was pregnant, so it was a lot easier to get on the ground that day. I'm 6 months pregnant now, so it's hard to get on the ground. Anyways, I got crisscrossed in front of him, and he was like grunting and swaying and eyes closed, like not able to connect or probably even understand what people were saying to him, which is that trauma brain. Like, as I knew not all of his brain was working. And so I sat down crisscross and put my hands out and I said his name and didn't say what's wrong. I said, "What's going on?" And just tried to connect with him. And he started, he stopped swaying. And I said, "My hands are here if you want to hold my hands." And this really big teen boy put his giant hands in my hand. I said, "Give me your eyes," which is part of TBRI, just using eye contact to connect. And he looked at me and then he started calming down. Like he breathed slower, he quit swaying, and we started talking about basketball. And he was upset about a few things. And we got to like talk through that calmly. And staff is just like around me waiting, and it takes time to do that connection. But I knew he needed connection over being told what he was doing wrong. Because there were so many things he was doing wrong, like running down 5 flights of stairs, but that wasn't the space to do that. And we had space for that later. But I got just using that TBRI framework, I knew what his brain could handle right then. And he needed, like Kim said, he needed relationship in that moment and needed to know he was safe. And so we got him there. And he was like at least 6 inches taller than me. So me and this super tall boy walked hand in hand with a security guard that he had already connected with, walked to the elevator and got him back to his room. And so it was really cool just to see like connection and simple things. And really like child life, we talk about how kids regress in the hospital. And in that moment, he was really like a 7-year-old boy, and that wasn't his age. But like meeting him where he was at and then going like building onto that was really fun just to see him get back to normal and get to a safe place, and see like staff also got to avoid the trauma of like restraining him or forcing him to do anything. And so it was really cool to see like a really chaotic moment get peaceful and get this kid back to safety.
There are 2 things about that story that just jump out to me as really beautiful. First, that your approach wasn't what's wrong, but what's going on, because I think that is a default sometimes as adults of like, what's wrong? And the underlying message there is you're a problem to be fixed. Yeah. And yeah, I think, as child life specialists, we tend to be more thoughtful about our word choice than a lot of others, but I think that's a good one that, just colloquially how we speak to each other in everyday life, it's often what's wrong. And so I love that you kind of flipped that. The other thing that jumped out to me as you were talking was that you kind of asserted yourself and got everybody else to stop. And
which is not my style at all, but I knew that's what needed to happen in the moment. I even pointed my finger.
I love that. And I actually want to dig on that a little bit, because I think that, within the power structures and hierarchy within healthcare, child life specialists in general, I don't know that we always feel the most empowered to take that kind of stand. And I'm just wondering kind of what your thought process was before, during, after that, because it was clearly absolutely the right thing that needed to happen in that moment. But I mean, thinking back to when I was in the hospital, I don't know that I would have had the gumption to do it.
Well, I don't know that I always have that gumption, but in that big crisis moment, I knew that's what needed to happen. And so I think all my fears or worries about what's appropriate and professional kind of were on the back burner, because I knew what this kid needed. And afterwards I was thinking, who was that did that? Was that okay? How offensive was I? Afterwards I definitely doubted what I said, but I also knew it helped control his environment. So it was worth it. And I don't think I was rude. My friend that was there can tell me, can give me feedback. But I think in the moment I was focused on, what does this kid need? And what can happen? I can ask people to leave. And they did, because maybe they recognize I want to help, but I don't know that I am helping.
Right.
So not a whole lot of thought, except this is what needs to happen, or I have to change this environment.
And I think a lot of times what we teach in TBRI is that there's a dance that you do with the kiddo family, whoever you're working with. So that kid needed help immediately and in a very specific way. So Dottie met him at that same kind of energy level. If it were a different infraction or thing that she needed to correct, she might not have been so brazen, right, with the people around her. So we talk about this often in doing a dance with the kiddo. And she probably was able to do that even with her interaction with that kid. So later she was able to give some structure, hey, that's not okay. We got to do some different things. But earlier on, it was all about connection. So there is a type of moving with a kiddo. And sometimes that can go up and down, right? You think they're calm and then you're like, oh, here we go, going back up. So we talk about a lot of times attunement, right? Being attuned to where the kiddo is, and which is why you must be connected to them before correction can happen. That's why she was so successful, because she had money in the bank with that kid already. Versus other people. It could have been other people who said the same thing you did that morning before you got there. But because you had money in the bank with him, he knew that you were concerned about him as a person and not just addressing his mess ups.
Yeah, that's good.
So we've mostly talked about this in kind of a broad general sense, but I think, with everything going on in the world, it's important to acknowledge that we are experiencing a global pandemic right now. In the US, we're on, week 2 of a lot of
hard
of a lot of hard things happening in the world. And I'm wondering if you, coming from this mindset, from this framework, have any advice for, certainly child life specialists, but also, parents and caregivers in general, on how we navigate this world through the lens of TBRI.
Yeah, I think, Dottie mentioned it, and most people who are passionate about TBRI, it's not something that you use at work and you put it down. It just begins to be your framework in how you do relationship with people, whether they come from a hard place or not. And it gives you a lens to see different people, where you can have a sense of compassion, not what's wrong with you, but what has happened to you, right? And so you are responsive and not reactive to people's behaviors, whether you agree or not. So I've been having a lot of conversation with people, even as an African American woman. Like, I do not agree with the looting and destruction. I understand from a trauma response why it's happening. It is the same as that kid running and not caring, not knowing where he was going, right? Kids will run and they don't have a plan, right? Trauma is in their body, and physiologically they need to get it out, right? So I don't know if people, right, leave their home and say, I'm going to go bust windows tonight. I think some people do and some people don't. They start off as it being peaceful and something happens. I know I was able to just say to myself kind of what I felt real agitated in my physical body. And I kept trying to say, let me go for a walk, right? And I would go for a walk and come back, and it's still not helping. Well, this is what we talk about, right? This is what we train our staff, and it's in our body. We've got to find a healthy way to get it out. It must come out, and then we process it. And so I think that's even a good way that we can look at what we see on the news. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of kiddos from hard places who have grown up to be now adults, mm-hmm. still in those right, in an adult body, but still that little 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old who experience some real hard things. Do we have to agree with them in order to understand? But what we do know is the same thing. It takes regulation, a co-regulation from other people to help during these times of crisis. It takes communities of Dotties, right, to come in swiftly and seriously, to meet at that same energy level, right? You can't come in passively if the city's burning down. You've got to move in quickly with that same energy, because they need our calm for their storm. And it'll be the same thing. It's absolutely the same thing on a systemic, on a greater kind of community-wide level. But the same principles will apply.
Yeah.
Would you agree, Dottie? What would you add?
That was just really good. I would just add, I think it's really easy to look at, especially the kids in these past few months and even the past couple of weeks, and just recognize like the hard place that all kids are in, just because life is so different. But I think it's worth it for caregivers and parents to recognize, like, we all have some level of trauma and anxiety in our bodies, and it's worth it to take care of yourself and even just pause and reflect on like how you're being affected, so that you can be a better parent, be more present, not be a perfect parent, because that's not even going to happen, even if there's not a pandemic. But I think it's worth it. And that's what TBRI talks about, is like mindfulness of your own history, so that your history isn't determining your decisions. But reflecting on your history lets you have a little more control and a little more of your brain engaged on just what you do as a parent and as a human. So I think taking the time to pause and reflect is totally worth it. It's really hard in this season where a lot of us don't have as much time as we used to have, or space. But if you can find that space, I think it's worth it for parents and caregivers to go there. And even if it's a couple minutes, it's definitely worth it.
So thank you for that. If folks are interested in learning more, what's the best place to send them? Is there something that we can send them to read, or website to go to? Where should people go if they want to learn more about TBRI?
Yeah, you can go to child.tcu.edu. So child.tcu.edu. And there's a host of resources. You can also Google it, and there are small kind of videos, portraits, there's reading material as well, and some other resources that are available for folks to get more information.
Fantastic. We'll definitely link to that off of this video. And just, thank you both for sharing your expertise, for giving us a lot to think about, both, kind of in general terms of how we work as child life specialists, but also in how we look at, some of the bigger things happening in society right now. To everyone else that's been watching this, thank you so much for taking the time, and we'll see you for our next Child Life in Action.
All right. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.